not have a rainbow without a storm first. And nobody changes in good times. Why would you? We only change in bad times. Well, these are some bad times. These are some challenging times. So it's time for some radical transformational change. I think the first thing is we got to get our head right. We got to get our head in the game. I'm reminded of the CEO of Coca-Cola, Mr. Woodruff, Robert Woodruff in the 60s when Dr. King was alive. And Dr. King won the Nobel Peace Prize. And when he came home, this is a story that not many people know, he came home and the business community in Atlanta wouldn't honor him, refused. The mayor called the CEO of Coca-Cola for help. And the CEO gathered everybody in the room, the business leaders, and said, look, let me explain this to you very quickly. I run an international supply chain company. He just won the most important award in the world. If you can honor this man, we're going to move out of this backwards town because you don't understand how the world works. Well, they honored him. The ballroom was full. All people see is the fact that the ballroom was full. That's what the image that the world saw. We need leaders like Robert Woodruff at Coca-Cola who use the power of their brand, power of their balance sheet to force a new vision of what's right in this country.
I think this country, as we saw with the Kerner Commission report and the riots in '68, now it's 2020, we will see this happen time and time again. So my request to the CEOs, and I'm sure they will understand this, now is the time to go big. Short answers to long, horrific questions about the stain of slavery are not going to solve the inequality problem. We need to focus on wealth creation and wealth generation. And to do that, we must bring the descendants of slaves into equality with this nation. And that's what I proposed in this $14 trillion proposal to provide reparations, not only for the sin or the atonement of the sin of slavery and Jim Crowism and desegregation, both de facto and de jure, but to cause America to live up to the concept and the notion that this nation was born on the idea of American exceptionalism. And if we take that big leap, I am convinced that the problems that we confront today can be solved, but it takes a big, bold action, and $14 trillion in reparation for damages visited upon the heirs of slaves is an appropriate statement.
I think the fundamental question is, do we do more than we're required to do to actually give people full access to participating in our society? What I said before, I mean. I think business has the means to eliminate some of the barriers to full participation. We have the ability to eliminate some of the inequities in our society. We can see those inequities and disparities in education. We can see them in employment. We can see them in housing. We can see them in healthcare. We can see them in the criminal justice system. And I think fundamentally what business can do, whether you want to call it reparations or not, I think we can step up to address in today's world the continuing results of years and years of racial prejudice in this country.
I think we have to be able to be as deliberate with dealing with the solutions as we have, as our large society is deliberate in dealing with the fact that we have so many systemic inequities. When we look at everything from employment rates, wealth rates, health disparities, et cetera, we can't pretend like these things have been an accident. Many of these things that we're looking at, these have been historic, these have been laws that have been passed, and we're watching the implications of it show itself every single day. We can't understand the way we look at ghettoized societies, for example, without understanding the history of redlining and without understanding the history of discriminatory lending policies and discriminatory housing policies, and how all these various things then line up into the level of economic and social and health disparities that we see within our society. We also, if we're talking specifically about the element of policing, we have to understand that there are heroic people who are in the uniform every single day, who are not running away from the problem, but every day, because of both their jobs and their moral responsibility, are running to problems every single day. You know, I remember as I'm a combat veteran, and I remember with the 82nd Airborne Division, and I remember in Afghanistan, you know, I was deploying to areas that I didn't know anything about. I couldn't point to on a map a couple of years earlier, but I was being asked to go into communities and go into areas with my flak vest and my Kevlar and my weapon in my hand, and asking people to trust me. We have to understand that when we're talking about policing within the United States, it's not just simply about how do we give people better training. It's also about how are we strengthening laws of accountability? How are we making sure that when these things happen and when these incidents happen, that when people are demanding for justice, that is not just going to continue falling on a level of deaf ears from the protection of laws that are in place to not necessarily support the communities, but are more in place to support the officers.
I have to say that corporate America talk is cheap. You know, I've talked about the fact that, say, we're working on diversity in a company is unacceptable to me. Because in corporate America, we don't work on anything else. We don't work on improving our earnings. We don't work on meeting our product deadlines or for our product launch. You either do or do not, as my husband, boldly wrote about Yoda. There is no try. And if you don't get it done, you get fired. But when it comes to diversity, for whatever reason, this has been this ongoing struggle where we can't move the needle. I love the saying, math has no opinion, none. Just count. And when you count and you see at the highest levels of corporate America, all the way down the chain, the differences in the numbers and how people of color, Black and Brown Americans, underrepresented minorities do not show up in the numbers that we exist in this country, that is not acceptable. And so what must we do? Hold ourselves accountable in corporate America. Set targets like we set targets on everything else. Incentivize people. You get what you incent. Be very clear and very bold about what the expectations are. And if we do that like we do everything else, I mean, corporate America is run by all-stars. They are used to winning. If we do that like we do everything else, we would see this needle move.